Hey guys, what is up? Welcome to the live stream. Hope you're having an amazing hump day. I'm super pumped for the stream tonight. So, um, let me talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing this week for people who want to keep coming back to the streams. I'm going to keep doing these regular 3 days a week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Central Time. And my goal is to continue to work through issues in projects, help you guys find new techniques, new ways of developing yourselves, and discovering ways to overcome obstacles and also just level up your skills. That's kind of why I'm here. Also, would love to see you guys become a part of the Orange Guild. If you haven't done that already, check that out at theorangeguild.com. And anyways, just want to say thank you guys so much for tuning in. Love to see you guys. Hey, Dev Coda, good to see you again. Glad you're here tonight. I'm just going over the schedule for the week. So tonight we're gonna work on some texturing, some shading cycles, kind of pick up a little bit where we left off, and just see kind of how far we go. If you guys have questions as we go through things, I'm gonna be working a little bit more on the painting side tonight than the node side, hopefully. And tomorrow we're going to be working on getting into, let me grab my notebook actually real fast. Blanked on what tomorrow is. Yes. So tomorrow we're going to be doing weathering, and we're going to be talking about how to add dirt and dust and grime and all that sort of stuff to the textures, because right now they're going to be really, really clean out of the box, and we want to figure out a way to dirty those up. And then Friday, we're going to do something really cool that's a little different and non-blender. We're going to work on designing a hand-carved pipe that we're going to be putting in the illustration in Photoshop. And so I'm going to be sketching that, drawing that up, and then we can go in later and sculpt that and you know, go through that process. And actually, wanted to kind of show you guys my sketchbook. So hopefully you guys can see what some of those look like. And down here are some of the pipes that I'm kind of working on sketching. And then over on this page, you can kind of see a little bit more of some of those designs and things that we're currently looking at taking into Photoshop on Friday and working up to a much better level. So that's all I got for right now as far as updates go. Oh, actually, yeah, I am doing a dragon for a separate project, so I did draw a dragon too. So if you guys have ideas for the pipe, I'm open to anything you can think of. Right now I'm thinking of like designing something based on like a Corsair ship or a pirate ship or something like that. A lot of these really fancy pipes have carvings and you know, they have all sorts of scenes that are depicted all over. So it won't just be, you know, carved into a surface. Like, we're gonna actually create objects that are the shape of this pipe. All right, so let me switch over to my monitor and kind of show you where we left off and where we're gonna pick up. Okay, so now that we can see the scene here, I've spent the past 5 days or so really, you know, working up the details and trying to nail down all of the little pieces and get things into place so we can kind of pick up. I'd say the illustration at this point, as far as layout goes, I've got everything about 50% of the way there. And so let me go ahead and show you kind of where we've got to at this point. So jump into Photoshop. Okay, so this is a render that I just did a few minutes ago of where the scene is currently at right now. And as you can see, quite a bit has happened since last week. So tonight I'm gonna walk through a little bit about what we've done, or what I've done, and then talk a little about what we're gonna work on tonight. So looking at the scene right now, you can see that we've obviously gone in and added more textures. Last week, Friday night, you saw me starting to texture this up in Photoshop, so I can open up these maps if you guys wanna see them. And then you'll see kind of how those are laid out if you're interested in that. Let me know in the comments and I can do that for you. But as we're getting in here, I've still got the map to do. You can see that, but I've got the money textures in there, and not all of them are in place. I've still got normal maps to do on several of these, but it's still too clean, right? And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about tonight. All of this stuff, if I zoom in, I did a 200% render for you guys, so you guys can see all of these details really up close. The handwriting and the texture that's on top of the surface looks decent, and so does the underlying paper. But as we get into sort of the uniformity of the wrinkles and all that stuff, that's something you kind of want to break up as you're texturing. And then also we're going to want to go back and think about the story as far as where this is going so far. So right now, this looks brand new, right? Like somebody just bought this at a store, went home, opened it up, and started writing. And that's obviously not what we're really going for here, because we've got several dates as far as entries go in the journal. And so this kind of needs to look aged. It needs to look like it was out in the field. He was carrying it around. He's got some dirt on these pages and all that kind of stuff. The map is going to look even more worn because it's going to be sort of parchment, rolled up, folded, maybe kicked around. Maybe he found these and they were super old. And so those need to be dirtied up. And everything kind of needs to have a layer of somewhat grime or dust or tarnishing or something added on top. So let me go ahead and continue to move around the scene so you can see everything. The sugar is something I've spent a while on, and got it looking decent. I had to use a particle system to kind of get it to look like sugar the right way, but I think this is in a good place. The coins and everything over here are good, but we're also going to need to tarnish those up even more and make them just feel, worn. And obviously the money is still too perfect. We need to add some wrinkles and all of that. Finally got the spoon done, so thank God for that. Actually wrapped that up this afternoon. And tonight we're going to be jumping into substance a little bit and adding some textures onto that. So that'll be good. Got some leather in on the surface here, and yeah, so on and so forth. All the way around the scene, you can see just how much we've done. Little ink droplets from the pen down here, and all of that. So there we go. So Dev Coda had a question or a comment asking if I was going to possibly do this in Eevee. So it's a possibility when 2.8 comes out to jump into Eevee with this and try it out. It'll just depend on how much will actually come over intact. There's a lot of things that this project can use in Eevee that wouldn't be a problem at all. And so, yeah, maybe we'll see. We'll have to take the geometry down a little bit so it's not so dense, but it's possible. And also we need to work on the wood texture a little bit because it's looking a little bit too uniform right now. Okay, so let's start off by taking a look at our scene a little bit. Switch back to Blender. Okay, so if I zoom in, you can see the sugar. I had a particle system that I made, I converted to be just objects. So these are all duplicated objects. So I'm saving memory and the scene's still quick and all of that. There's about 56 cubes in there. The spoon, which is what we're gonna start working on right now, has been retopoed. So you can see this, still got a subsurf modifier on there. And then if I go ahead and break the scene up a little bit, we need to add a node editor and a UV map. Okay, so let's get rid of that. So this is the basic UV layout for the retopo version of the spoon. It's not a great UV layout. I did this really, really fast right before the stream started, just so I could have some normals that I could bake for you guys. And, if we needed to fix this, we could go back later and, redo this by hand where it was much better laid out and not so messy. But there we go. So let's switch over to the node editor and take a look. Okay, so I'm not gonna go over the normal baking process. You guys saw that last week, or maybe the week before. We're working on the spoon. If you have a question about it, I'll be happy to answer that. Just let me know. And but that's what I did this afternoon. I UV'd and then I brought in the original sculpt and baked that. And if we look at the spoon normal map, which I'll open, textures, spoon normals. So you can see this is the bake we got out of Blender. And so there we go. That's all it takes to kind of get that going. And now what we want to do is make this look a little bit less perfect. So if we were to jump back into Photoshop and look at the spoon really fast, you can see that it's basically just a purely mirror-like silver right now. And in order to take advantage of the features that Substance has, I want to jump in there and tarnish this up a little bit. So to get started, what we need to do is export a OBJ of the spoon object, the retopoed spoon object from Blender. So we just need to go to Export, select Wavefront OBJ, and then I've already got one saved here, so we can select this. And then you want to make sure you have checked off selection only so it doesn't export the entire Blender scene, which would be very bad and possibly crash. So once you got that done, that's pretty much all you need to do to get started. And go to export that. It shouldn't take very long. And now let's go ahead and open up Substance Painter. Okay, now, fair warning, I'm not an expert in Substance Painter. And I know how to use it. I've used it on several commercial projects, but I still have to feel my way around a little bit to find some menus and things. So please be patient with me as I sort of fumble around a little bit, but I'll show you the basic process. So the first thing you're gonna do is select a new project from the file menu. So, whoops, let's pull that back a little bit. Go to File New, and now it's gonna basically ask you how to set up your Substance project. So I'm gonna assume you guys have no experience with Substance, just so you guys get a quick rundown of how this works. This is where the idea of PBR workflow came in that we talked a little bit about last week. So the idea is to use a physically based rendering engine that is certain specific maps that will allow you to work the process and create consistent materials that are realistic, that follow physics in the real world, right? So you can choose to do that with a metallic rough workflow or a specular glossy workflow here. You've also got custom presets for Unreal Engine or Unity if you want to work in those game engines. There's a way to interface Substance's textures straight into those engines, so you can work with these presets for that. And then there's other things like Adobe has a new format out. You can use this for that. Or you can go non-PBR and try this out. Now, I tried this a minute ago, and I didn't know really how to use that workflow because I'm not used to it. So I'm actually just going to go straight into specular glossy. So we'll select this, and then we need to pick the mesh, that OBJ that we just exported. So I'm going to navigate to the spoon, double click that. And then I like to work in OpenGL format for my normal map because that's the format that I typically work in when I'm in Blender. So we need to pick this. And then document resolution is just the texture size that you're working at when you want to export. So obviously, when we jump into Substance, the idea is we paint up our object, but then we want to export those back to another rendering engine like Cycles. And so this is going to pick the resolution that you're painting in your document. So we'll pick 2048 because that's the size of my normal map. And then if you already have any maps that you've already been working on in Photoshop or something else, in this case, we have a normal map that we baked in Blender, we can add those here. And so we'll go ahead and add in our normal map. So I'll pick in the textures folder, my spoon normals. And you can choose to add these in manually and pull those in from another project. Or if you really want to, you can save both your retopoed object and your original sculpt out of ZBrush or Blender or anything like that. And then you can have Substance bake it for you. And so that's another way to work. So we'll just hit OK. And now that brings in our spoon. So the navigation's a little bit different. It's based on what I'm pretty sure is industry standard in the Autodesk workflow for navigation and keyboard shortcuts. So if you're in Blender and you go to Substance, it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. But basically, all you need to do when you want to rotate around the 3D viewport is you can hold Alt and left click and drag, and that will let you rotate around just like you're using your middle mouse button in Blender. In fact, if you hold Alt and you look at this little menu over here, it'll tell you all these little keyboard shortcuts. And so any of the modifier keys that you hold down, it will pop up a little menu. This is Shift, this is Control. And so that's really handy and something that will help you out. So Alt left drag is rotate, Alt middle mouse is move, and Alt right click is zoom in and out, or you can use your scroll wheel. So let's jump in here. Now you'll notice, even though we imported our normal map, it's not applied right now. And so we need to select that. So we'll go down to texture settings over here. And in this case, it's right next to my layers palette. And then I'm gonna expand this up a little bit. And this is that option that you can use to bake your texture maps. In this case, here's all the options that you have. And for this, you will have to have a high-res version to bake from. It won't work if you just have a low-res version, but this is the option for that. Tonight, we're not gonna work on that, but this is where you'd find that. So you see right here, it says select normal map. So we'll just left-click this, and then I'll select the only option, which is our normal map. As soon as we do that, we can see that it's been applied. So if we zoom in now and sort of start navigating around, you can see that right there. So looks like our map is working well and it's doing what we need it to do. So Substance Painter basics, here we go. If you've been working with Photoshop at all, you're gonna have a little bit easier of a time because you'll understand basic layering, and this is the way Substance works. Now, so I'm talking specifically about Substance Painter. Substance Designer is a whole different ball of wax, but Painter works basically like stacking layers up. So it's not node-based like Cycles, but it's like this. So it'll start you off with a blank layer, and then you have the option of starting to layer things up on top of each other. And obviously, you're gonna paint in here. Now, you will probably need a tablet like you have a Wacom tablet or something like that that you would use to sculpt with. I'm using a really cheap little $50 Wacom bamboo tablet, and that's all you really need to get started. So apart from these layers, and you'll notice you have different layer options in terms of what you can create here, you have materials that are already in Substance. And if you're part of the Substance membership, you've got access to hundreds or thousands of them online as well that you can download for your projects. And so what's great about this is if you go to your project shelf right here, this is gonna be all the custom textures that you've imported for your project specifically. So this will filter by category all of the different kinds of substances and things like that that you want to play with. So alphas are typically going to be what you use to paint. Think of these like masks or possibly depth that you can use to paint normal maps, things like that. And they're basically just outlines and things that give you shapes to paint with. And then you've got textures that you can see here. So this is some grunge maps. Procedurals are just like nodes and cycles in terms of the ability to generate tileable, repeatable things. So that's pretty cool. And then you've got textures. So this will actually let you paint with a normal map on top of the normal map you already have. And then so on and so forth. So this is a bit more like hard surface modeling. If you want to start getting in here with a mech or something and put some nuts and bolts in there in the normal map, you can do it there. And so I won't go over all of these, but you got brushes. Particles are really, really cool. Those let you kind of bounce things around the scene. So if you think about it like this, let's say you had a paint bucket and you wanted to rain down that paint bucket in the scene. Or let's say you had, this is a better example. Let's say it was raining outside and you have a metallic object you're working on in Substance, and you want that rain that falls to create drips of rust down the side of a bucket or something like that. Well, you can select rain right here, and then when you drag, it will shower down realistic particle rain that will then create the texture for you. So that's pretty badass. So there's a lot here, but basically, if you want to get started really fast, what you need to go to is pick materials or smart materials, and you can just drag these onto your object here. So if you just hover over one of these and leave your mouse alone, it'll show you a bigger preview. So if we wanted to, let's say, start with aluminum, we could left click and drag and drop that on there. And there we go. We've already got a really nice looking material to get started with. And that's really the power of Substance as you get going, is that you don't have to be a master to get in here quickly and create a material and then modify it, right? So we're not really doing that from scratch. So DevCoda, you had a question. You asked me if I could do that in Blender. So what are you specifically talking about? And I'll try to answer your question. So you can see it's still a decent texture. It's giving us some nice weathering and some brushed sort of effects here, and a little bit of crevice work right here. Rain painting. You know, there is a way to do it. There is a way to do it. I've never done it before, but if you have ever heard of dynamic painting in Blender, I'm pretty sure that's what it's called. Let me search this real fast to make sure I don't give you any bad information. Yeah, it's called dynamic paint. Basically what this feature does is it allows you to drop particles in animation into an object, and it leaves an effect on that object in a texture channel. So you can think of this like, for the longest time, the hardest thing for me to think about was trying to have like a car or footsteps driving through snow, and how would you leave those tracks, right, in an animation? Because you could do it with blend shapes, you could get in there and get fancy, but like it would be very hard to animate that without just using a normal map that's animated, right? Well, dynamic paint allows you to actually drop objects into other objects, sort of like the physics engine. And the difference is that it dynamically creates textures on the fly based on the collisions that are happening with two objects. And so using that process, it might be possible to create a rain system, drop it on a plane, and have it sort of leave behind some normals or things like that for a texture that you could then use. But I will tell you, setting that up would be a pain in the butt, and it would not be nearly as user-friendly as just doing this in Substance Painter. So let me actually just go ahead and see if I can show you what that looks like, because it's such a cool effect. So if we have the rain selected here from particles, and then I go back up into view over here. Let me see if I can do this. I'll drag this layer 1 up above the aluminum brushed. And right now, if I drop this back down, we can see all of our settings for the rain. So there's so much you can tweak in here. But let's just start with a uniform color. Let's say we want to pick like black, right? So you can see here a preview of what it's going to do. And as we rain down in the scene, you can see what's happening. Hey, what's up? We got a new viewer, Tailsy Mods. What's up? Tailsys Mods. Cool. Good to see you. So yeah, that is kind of an interesting thing you can do with some of these physics brushes. So that's the paint, and obviously you can tweak the speed and all those kind of settings. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. But you can also like break glass. Here's a fracture thing that'll do this for you. And obviously it'll use your pressure sensitivity on your tablet and all that. That's kind of cool. You can burn things. So you can imagine doing this might be possible with keyframing in Blender, but it wouldn't be live, right? And so that's the real thing here. And let me just say, like right now, I'm one of the biggest Blender fans in the world. Obviously, I'm one of only 50 people in the world that's certified to teach it from the foundation, but use whatever tool you need to use to get the job done, right? I don't paint in Blender a lot because it's easier to paint in Photoshop. I don't paint in 3D in Blender a lot because it's not as fast as painting in Substance. So just think about that kind of stuff as you work on your projects. Okay, so we want to start tarnishing. Now, the real reason I'm coming over to Substance tonight is not only because of the awesome painting features, but because of the smart material features that are in Substance. And so there's some really cool things that are now being developed into Blender that are, I think, inspired by these sorts of settings from this software. And they're not quite 100% of the way there yet, but we're going to take a look at some of those things tonight. And so just real quick before we get in here and start messing with the actual material, I'm going to show you guys a quick rundown of how we would paint. So basically here's how we layer it up. We have our basic material on the bottom. That's a folder right there. If you left click that and open that, you can see that we have different layers here already. So if we turn off scratches, that's going to remove scratches that are already embedded in that material. This is the basic aluminum texture. So we can turn that on and off. And then you can also change the properties here. So if you want it to be a little bit less shiny, you can lower the glossiness, see what that does, and so on and so forth. So I'm actually going to start with a different material. So I'm going to delete that. And then I'm going to run in here and grab a material that looks something a little bit more like silver. So I'm just going to search silver and see what we have. So this is a pure silver. See, it's much more shiny. And I'm going to start off by taking down the glossiness so it's a little bit more matte. And remember, we're trying to go for a sterling silver kind of tarnished look that you'd find on silverware that's, you know, maybe not had the best care in the world, so it hasn't been polished every day. And so we're gonna get in there with that. So start with that. We can also dim the brightness a little bit. Just gonna bring that down so it's not pure bright up there. And then once again, we'll want to put this layer 1 above it so we can paint on top of that. And now we can go ahead and grab another texture to put on top for our paintbrush. So we'll go to brushes, and these are already set up with textures connected. And so if we just pick one of these and then we left drag with our mouse, or in this case, I'm using my tablet, you can see this is how we would paint. And it's pressure sensitive. You can obviously tweak all of these settings. So you've got brush size here. This is gonna say whether you wanna use pressure or no pressure. So obviously I can taper as I paint. And then you've got flow, and all the basic things you would have in Photoshop are pretty much here. And so the hard thing about doing this is if you're not used to Substance, you would probably want to just jump in and get started, and you'd grab a paintbrush and you'd think, well, all right, so I want to add tarnish, but I don't want it everywhere, obviously. So I'm going to have to get way in here, and I need to just focus on a crack. So I'm going to make the brush smaller, and I'm going to get in here, and I just want to paint it, you know, in this area down here. Maybe we grab, you know, something a little bit different, something like this. And yeah, let's just get in here. That's great. But think about having to do that everywhere, and there's a better way. So I'm going to start off by deleting that layer. And then we're going to add a new one right here, same layer. And I'm going to use something called a smart mask. So if we jump down to smart masks, you can see previews of these black and white masks that are exactly like you would expect to find as a layer mask in Photoshop, or as a mask that we would use for a factor input in a mix node in Cycles, right? So the idea here is to isolate the cavities. So we're only going to be painting in areas that are in crevices and things like that. You saw me do this a little bit with the pointiness node attribute in Blender, but this is much better because it actually works with a normal map. So you'll remember that our actual object doesn't have all these little crevices. Those are just coming from the normal map. Well, these take that into account. So what we need to do is pick an area or a map that gets us going in the right direction. So we can pick something that already has some of those crevices highlighted, and then we can go ahead and paint our map into that. So I'm gonna just kind of hover over these and see if I can find one that I like. We'll start with, let's start with this one, and we can play with this. So I'm gonna drag this in here, undo that. First thing I'm gonna do, rather than create this layer, well, no, let's go ahead and try this. I'll show you what it does. Okay, so we've dragged our smart layer onto our layer one. You can see it down here labeled as dirt right here. And so now if I go ahead and start painting, you're going to see kind of the way it works. Let me go ahead and add. Let me start with a different layer actually. So instead of using a regular paint layer, we actually have something over here called fill layer. That's just like a paintbrush. So paint bucket. So let's go ahead and drop this down to a black. So that's for the tarnish. And then let's try this again. Okay, I'm gonna try a different map. Let's see if this is working. Okay, it is. It's just not turned up enough for us to be able to see everything yet. So I'm gonna pick, let's try this one again. And then let's change some of these settings around. So if I select my dirt mask here, generator, we can see all the settings here. So dirt level, we could turn that up. Something like that. Contrast would be here. Triplanar projection's good if you want to, if you don't have a UV map and you want to try to project this in a fast way without seams, that'll help you. So we turn that on and then you can blend that. Anyways. And then we can play with the grunge amount and so you can see what's going on there. So this will help us by getting things going relatively quickly. And you'll see because I have seams in my UV map layout, we are getting seams in here as well. So it won't get me 100% of the way there, but it will get me started. And so once we have something like this in here, if you want to go back in, you can add another layer on top of this and then paint on top, just like we were before. So we go back to our brushes, maybe grab something a little bit softer. And now we can start working on some of this. So you can see how we blend that in, and that's the basic idea. Now, doing this quickly is easy because we're already in 3D. If we were having to do this in Photoshop, where we were trying to match these seams up or something ridiculous like that, it would take forever. And believe me, I've done that, and it's not any fun. So if you get a chance to play with Substance, definitely try it out. And if you haven't before, hopefully tonight will be a cool sort of like intro for you so you can see how it works. But anyways, this is how you would kind of start layering things up. So let's get back to trying to find a mask that actually does what we want it to do. So I'm going to start with, let's get rid of, yeah, just get rid of that. And then we'll start with a fill again, just to make this easier to see where it's affecting things. I'm going to make this red, and then let's go back to our smart masks again. Okay, so definitely want something that is going to just affect the interior edges. I can invert this. It's kind of doing the opposite of what you want. So Here's something to be aware of. We do not currently have a map for any of these channels. So you can see that because of the mask and the type that it's using, it's looking for those as input. And so I believe that the edge detection may be calculated from the ambient occlusion or the curvature map. So we may have to have those generated in order to use these layer masks. But that can be done in Blender pretty easily. So let me go ahead and make a few more attempts to kind of get this working. And then we can jump into Blender and try that out real fast. See if that's what we need. Let's try cavity rust. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of something there, but not much. So you can see that it is paying attention to the normals, but it's not really looking at the crevices yet. And I think part of that has to do with our lack of additional maps. So what do you guys want to do? You guys want me to work on getting in there and playing with baking the other maps, or would you like me to keep painting and try to get this going? Listen in the chat if you guys have anything you'd like me to do as preference. Let me know. Let's see. Let's start with another material on top. Don't want to do dirt. Dirt may be a little too intense. And these smart materials are also going to have additional normal maps that add to the height and everything. So it will actually look like dirt is caked on top of it. So if I just drag this out, you can see what I'm talking about. Interesting. Lots of settings. Anyways, so let's see. What else can we do? Let's get started by just hand doing some stuff, and then I'll go back and paint those or bake those textures if we need them. So I'm gonna do this pretty subtly. I don't want to get in there real fast and kind of mess things up with too much. So I want to pick a very soft brush and something that we can just kind of layer on a little by little. So maybe something like this. And this is a preview of the way the material looks in Substance right now. So we can use this as a guide for setting our specular settings and all of that sort of stuff in the material. So if we scroll down to the very bottom to our material right here, these are all of the channels that we currently have as image maps. So glossiness, anything with a slider you can change on the fly. So you can look at this highlight right here in the middle and kind of preview how shiny that is. So in this case, we're going to want to bring this down fairly low because we're painting tarnish and there's not going to be a whole lot of reflectivity there. And then we can just start with that. And I don't like to go pure black, so possibly bring the that up a little bit. So we'll start with something like that. And let's get in here and paint a little bit. You can also create masks manually. And so if you want to right click something, you can add a generator will create one using settings. And then you can also come up here and add a black mask or a white mask. It does exactly what it does in Photoshop. Or you can select an image, do it that way. So if you select black mask, anything that you paint now in terms of this is going to not show up if it's black, and it will show up if it is white. So if you select this and you want to paint on the mask, you can grab a brush, and then let's say we only want to paint areas like in here. So we'll start painting on this a little bit. Make sure our map is set up correctly. Okay, let's switch this real fast. Yeah, you can see that showing up a little bit down there at the bottom. Yeah, so if I were to paint a bunch of this stuff right here, which we should be able to preview. Jump back here and start painting on this, it should adhere to the mask. So let's try inverting. Yeah, there we go. So you can see what that does there. And in our case, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of that. All right. So you are limited to the resolution of your texture that you have set up. So when we set that up in the beginning with a 2K texture, we can only zoom in so far and paint, and then it won't really work anymore in terms of being clear. So keep that in mind as you go. Make sure our settings are where we want them to be. Go ahead and clear this layer. Sorry guys, I'm having some hiccups tonight with getting this going. I think that's just too soft. Let's jump in here. So yeah, that will help us get going. So let's get some color down on this layer, and then we can jump in and start getting the mask working for us. Okay. So let's just play a little bit. See if we can work out this mask issue. Throw a soft dirt mask on that. Okay, Let's look at this real fast, see if we can figure out what's going on here. So taking a look at the smart mask, looks like we're going to need to go ahead and bake those additional maps. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. So one of the ways we can do it is in Blender for some of these, and then the other way is to grab our original sculpt and then have Substance do it for us. So let's try Substance because it might be a little faster, and we'll do that first. So I'm gonna go ahead and save a copy of this, and let's navigate to our projects folder here. Okay. So we jump back to our texture settings. You can see all the options we have down here for things we can bake, and we want to bake mesh maps. So what I need to do first is obviously export my high-res sculpt, but I want to select a 2048 setting here, and then we can check and uncheck all of the options we want for what to bake. So in this case, I don't want world space, I don't want normals, we already have that, and the rest of these we can go ahead and bake here. And we don't need an ID map because we only have one material here. So let's go ahead and bake the rest of these. So let's jump back into Blender. I'm going to save our project. I'm going to open up the file that I've been using for the sculpt. Pray that this doesn't crash, because this is a huge sculpt. Okay, so I'm going to hide this. Select both of these objects because they were both sculpted. And you'll see this is about 5 million polys, so it's quite large. But let's go ahead and export this as an OBJ. Selection only definitely is what we want. And then we can name this spoon sculpt. And then pray. Might work fast, don't know. I haven't tried to export the sculpt yet, so. Wouldn't be the first time Blender's crashed on a stream, so we'll hope for the best. So anybody out there that is in the chat, while we're waiting, if you have any questions about what we're working on or something you'd like to talk about, let's do it. We'll let this sit here for a minute, and then if it doesn't respond, we'll assume it's crashed and just move on. Sometimes what I like to do is jump into the folder where we're saving and take a look at the file size for our export and just see if it's going up. So that will tell us whether or not it is actually saving. Okay, so it looks like it's saved. There we go. Wow. Oh, that's the material file. Okay. Yeah, 348 megs. That's big. All right, so let's jump back over to Substance now and take a look at our settings here. And I don't know if I need to change much of this stuff. just see what happens. Pretty sure I needed to have a high-res sculpt version, but maybe that was just for the normal map. So we'll bake these and see what changes. And once it's finished, it should insert all of them for you in the channels according to the selection that you had. So if we hover over these, you can see the result, and they'll follow the UV map that you already have and all of that. So there we go. Now we've got curvature, ambient occlusion, like all that kind of stuff. And it looks like it's already taken the normal map into account for the curvature portion. So I think that's what it's going to need to be able to use these masks. Let's jump back to our layers. One more time, let's get rid of this and then jump in here and try this again with a new mask. So do a fill layer, bring this down to black, and then let's lower the glossiness. Something like this. So this would be our tarnish layer. And then let's drop our dirt mask on top of that. Okay, so it's already gone ahead and plugged those in for us for our maps. And now we should be able to see a difference with our settings. So let's play with this a little bit, increase this up, and there you go. So now you can see following our normal map and everything else. Seams are still a problem, but that's okay. For the main parts that would take forever to paint, this has saved us quite a bit of time. So there we go. So the question is, how much do we want to tarnish? You bear in mind, we're gonna be out here, and obviously we only wanna do certain sections. We don't wanna do the whole thing. But I think in this case, you may want to contrast this, drop it down to where it's just kind of like this. And then let's go ahead and clean up the rest of our layer here. So we might add a mask, and I'm not sure which one we need. So let's add another mask, and we'll do it on this down here. I'll get it. Here we go. So I'm not sure if it's going to let us do this without replacing this one here. So the best way to do the painting, maybe we can do it directly in this mask. I'm not sure. Let's grab a brush and see. Yeah, don't think so. Okay, so we have to add a paint layer there instead. All right, I'm gonna grab the soft brush and then just really quickly kind of paint this out a bit, as we don't want it this heavy, and we might even take down the flow, so it's going to be a little less, and see if it will use our pen pressure here. So the key when you're doing textures like this is going to be subtlety, both in adding things and removing things. You don't want it to be just uniform everywhere. So I don't want to do what I just did. I want to leave some of the tarnish in here. Probably not that much. So let's lower the opacity a little bit and just very gently kind of massage some of this away. And then anytime I see a seam, I'm going to go ahead and sort of paint over that to make sure that that's not, you know, obvious that it's a seam. Now you'll notice as we get further down here, our resolution's dropping quite a bit on the spoon, and that is because the texture map and the way that our UVs are laid out are quite a bit different in size. So areas that have a lot of sculpture detail, I've increased the size of that on the UV map, and areas that have a lot less detail, I've lowered the size. And one of the reasons I can get away with that for this particular project is if we look at the UV map, you'll see these big areas by the handle are taking up most of the image, and the spoon actually is completely out of scale with the rest of this, but a lot smaller. So you can think of it like this: areas where the spoon, the scoop itself is taking up a lot less part of the image, has a lot less pixel area. That's called texel density. So the idea of how much space your UVs take up in an image, those are called texels. And the areas over here on the sculpted parts have much more area because they need to have area. Now, the reason I can get away with these being smaller is because in our actual scene, if we jump back over to our scene here, you'll notice that the spoon is under the T. So because the T is going to be occluding most of that detail, you're never going to see it. And since I'm only really going to use this for that one project, it's not necessary to see all of those details up close, and you don't even notice that the texels are missing. So some handy little tricks of the trade there. All right, so let's keep this going. I'm going to try to get through this quickly so we can move on to some other more exciting things. But I wanted to give you guys a pretty basic rundown of how you would get into Substance. And sorry that I had some trouble getting going, but you know how it is. All right, so obviously the parts that are going to be used don't need to have a lot of this stuff on it, because when you wash this or polish it, it's going to be easier to get in here and clean all of that tarnish out because it's not aged and you're washing it all the time and all of that sort of stuff. Also, we're not really going to need to worry about the back side of the spoon because it's not going to be seen. So if we don't really want to paint this out, we don't have to worry about it, but I'm kind of a perfectionist in that I like to get things taken care of so I don't have to worry about it later. Okay, so we're leaving little spots here and there, but for the most part, that's coming off. And we're still not going to be seeing most of the underside of this ever. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this. Now you're going to see a little bit in the reflections. So I'm going to leave some of this down here, but not much. Okay. And then all we have to do now is go back and kind of clean up those areas that have seams. Now in this case, I'm going to add another layer and I'm going to paint on top by adding some of that tarnish back in. And we need to get a brush that is going to help us get that texture in there. So maybe I'll use this sandpaper brush. Lower the opacity quite a bit. There we go. Now you'll notice it's not using the mask here for this layer. So we could copy this mask and then paste it onto this layer. So we should be able to. Maybe we can copy the effect. Let's go back to our there should be a way to copy that effect. weird that I cannot paste that mask. Anyways, I'll leave it alone for now, but it's kind of annoying. If you guys know how to do that, let me know. Go back in here and try this a different way. Yeah, maybe that'll work. So these are raised up. I'm gonna heighten that up a little bit with some more tarnish. And then I used X on the keyboard to swap out the black and white colors. So actually I need to go the other way. I need to paint in these areas in here. And then I need to remove tarnish from these areas. So substance can be quite a bit of fun. Get in here, and once you've already done all the hard work of getting the model finished, spend a lot of time in here just kind of playing around with stuff and getting things spiffied up. But anyways, so the most important view is going to be this view because it's what we're going to see in the render. So we obviously need to focus on this area and make sure that that's dialed in appropriately. Now, this paint mask is still going to follow our mask on the entire layer, so those seams are still going to be there. If we want to get rid of those, we need to paint on top with another layer like we were just doing, and that's a way to hide them. Let's pull up our... What do we got? Something is low. Let's see, these are up. Let's grab another brush. Say leather. Better. You break that up a little bit. Some of these areas that are happening here are probably because my UVs are not as optimized as they should be. But that's okay. We'll work with it. Typically, I'd want to go back and do a lot better job, but this object is not super important in terms of not being able to fix this, because I can just touch the stuff up in Photoshop later if I need to. Only do what you need to do. Don't waste time on stuff that is something you can fix later. On the other hand, make sure you do the legwork that you need to do so that you don't end up having to spend more time later going back and fixing things. If it's going to take you more time. The only reason I'm not really doing that here is because I know I can do it quickly later, and it's just going to be easier to get that done. Okay, now here I want to get rid of this little line. So paint this out a little bit. So there, little seam right here. Get rid of that. So let's play a little bit with some different brushes. All right. So you get the idea. That is basically all you gotta do to jump into Photoshop and play with tarnishing some things up. So I'm gonna really quickly finish this up and then we can jump into another part of the project. So let's bring this up higher. Maybe grab the ink spatter brush here. That's kind of interesting. So maybe we'll play with increase the spacing, lower the flow. Let's keep the opacity down. And this could be sort of like water spots, something like that. So it's kind of a cool little factor right there. What else can we do? Ooh, interesting. Got mold again. Could be cool to have that on there for like water spots. Now again, we can't go so dirty that somebody wouldn't want to use this, right? This is just supposed to be enough to make it feel aged. So I don't want to go crazy here. But you know, for a bachelor archaeologist, Indiana Jones type guy, you know, I can see him using this still. So we can play with leaving these on here. Okay, good enough. Now let's go ahead and export our maps. So I'm going to save this. And so we've got multiple maps to export. If we actually go back into our textures folder, we need to look where we want to save these and then go to File, Export Textures. And then if we open up the texture set here, it's going to show you all of the different textures that it's going to export by name. There's your document size again. You can override some of the settings. So this would be the same setting as in Blender in terms of the space between the UV islands and how far those overlap. Play with that. It's got your configuration here. And then you can play with custom presets. So there's actually a Blender preset right here. So if you select that, jump into your export, you can see that it will kind of change the things that you have selected here. And so for the Blender preset, it's going to give you everything you would basically need for like a cycle shader. And like you said, you can customize all of the different outputs here for what you would want to create. So let's grab Blender. And now we've got it all set up. Let's make sure we have the right file selected. Sorry, I know this is taking some time. All right, back to our textures folder, select that, export. And depending on how big your scene is, this could take a minute. Okay, so that's done. Let's go ahead and kill substance. And this is what we get. So I've got other textures in this folder, but all of our existing textures and substance are now exported here, and we can pull those into Blender now. So I'm gonna leave all of our normal files that we got from Blender before, and then just in case we change our mind, I'll have those there. And now let's take a look at how to plug those in. So back in Blender, we have our node editor here and a UV editor. And let's play with duplicating the image texture. And I'm only gonna pull in what I need to pull in. to get started. So we'll jump down to the normal OpenGL, grab that, and plug that in here now instead of our other one. Replace the UV input, and let's zoom in on our spoon, take a look at that so far, just to make sure this is working. Okay, so that's still working for us. Turn that off. And let's see what else we got. So what I'm not seeing is like a diffuse map, which I was expecting to see. So let's look for that. It's kind of the most important map to have, actually. So I'm going to open the project back up. Let's see where we were wrong. Okay, so got this over here. Let's go back into our export textures. Got Blender selected. Interesting. So there's not an option here for, well, we've got base color. Why wasn't base color exported? All right, I'm not crazy. There is no base color, right? Yeah, it's not there. All right, let's see about playing with this. All right, let's look at this. So why wasn't the base color outputted? That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. Weird. Okay, let's try this another way. Let's go back to specular glossy workflow. So this one will give us diffuse, specular, glossy, normal. Okay, so I'm going to create a new folder just so we don't actually save over anything else we have in here. And we will just go ahead, grab that, re-export, and then see what we get. So I wonder if that showed up in the logs. Opacity needed by the map diffuse of the texture isn't available because opacity channel is missing in your texture set. Interesting. I wonder if that's why it did not export. So, all right, well, let's see about that. If I jump into that folder, okay, those all exported, but I don't think they're going to give us what we need. All right, so let's do the export and see if we get the same error from Blender. Save back over our other files. Wow, okay. Interesting. So I wonder if that has something to do with how we have this set up in the project files when we create the project. Anyways, all right, we'll make do with what we got. So yeah, I'll have to go back and see what I'm doing wrong here because it's been a bit with substance. But anyways, this is how you'd paint it up. Let's take a look at another way of getting this out of here. So if we were to right click here, we could export this mask to a file. Still not liking that option. Weird. All right, well, I'll have to figure that out. I've never run into a problem like that before. That is so weird. Look that up real fast. Looking up how to do something during the stream. Okay, so somebody else has had these errors. Texture set settings. The input map opacity needed by the map. Spoon diffuse. Texture set and spoon is available because opacity channel is missing in your texture set. Weird. It says I can add them here. I wonder if I uncheck something that I needed to have checked. It's odd. Okay, I'm not gonna waste too much more time trying to figure that out, but I will, and I'll tell you tomorrow how to fix this. I'm positive it has something to do with the way that I set up the project when I created the project. So yeah, I'll have to play with that. Okay, onward and upward. So what else do we want to work on tonight? Okay, so there are some things to look at, and perhaps we can start playing with those. As far as texturing goes, one of the big things I haven't done a lot of is wear and tear on these materials. So we've got a lot of normal maps left to generate for objects that need them. Also want to get in here and play with dirtying some of this stuff up. Now, I could go to Substance with all of this stuff and create new sort of wear and tear there. I prefer to do it procedurally if I can inside of cycles, because I just think it looks better and works better to have it at my fingertips within the node editor. But obviously there are limitations to that. So what we might play with a little bit is trying to add some dust to some of the stuff in the scene. So let's play a little bit with, let's pick this object down here and play with that. So we jump back in here. We're gonna be able to create a node setup for this and then kind of reuse it on everything in the scene. Now I don't want to do too much dust because obviously this is a scene where somebody's working on stuff and it hasn't just been sitting here forever. But we need to kind of just use our discretion here. So let's play with how we would do that. Now we know we want to put the dust on top of this object here. And so we'll start up cycles, and we won't worry right now about putting it only in certain areas. We'll just go ahead and create the material. So with our existing node network here, I'm going to go ahead and add a new shader, and let's just start off with a diffusion just to kind of see how this works. And the basic way we would layer anything on top of something else in a cycle shader is to duplicate whatever the latest mix shader is, and then plug in our new material on top of that. And that's how you would get something put on top. Now, in this case, if you're familiar with the way these nodes work, all the way over to 1, you're going to get the material on the bottom. All the way over to the left with a factor of 0, you're going to get all of this gone, and you're just going to have the original shader. And so how you blend these is what's going to determine what makes it look interesting. So to get started with, we just need to make sure that if we're just looking at the diffuse here, that this is going to be completely caked in dust with this. And so does this look like dust already? Because obviously it's completely covered. If not, we need to work on that before we start working on how it's mixed. So let's go ahead and just bring this down here. And so right now it's pretty uniform, pretty perfect. In all honesty, dust would probably be a little bit more rough. So let's take the roughness up a little bit. You could also play with the color. So rather than having it be white like that, you could dim this down. And let's say also that we want to play with a little bit of the coloring. So we go to something like color ramp, and then plug that in the color value, and we can get any two values here added in. So what's interesting about this is if we change this to something that's obvious, like red, we can see how those are reacting to each other. So pull that in, you obviously predominantly blue here, pull this in, and we're gonna get red. Now, right now it's just mixing between these two colors here. And so what we would want to do probably instead is have two different diffuse inputs, or actually change the way that the diffusion is spread over the entirety of the mesh. And so one of the ways we could do that is maybe we play with the geometry a little bit. And if we look at position here, we could play with splitting this value off and looking at these individually. So we know that because position is a purple output, that it is a vector which has an X, Y, and Z. And so if we look at the converter, we can separate X, Y, and Z from here. And then if we were to preview just these, you can see what those look like. So it looks like the Z output is going to give us height information from the bottom of the object all the way up to the top. And of course, each of these has a vector output, so we could go cycle through these and just play with what these all do. And then of course, because it's a black and white map, we can use that to drive what's happening. So a lot of interesting, cool things that can be done here. So we just need to find one that we want to work on. Get this real quick. Okay. Let's look at position, and then we're going to crush this a little bit. So everything at the very bottom of the dome down here is going to be black, and then everything crowding up towards the top will be white. I'm going to make this an ease. Okay. Let's pull these over here and then plug this color output into the factor down here for this color ramp. So now you can see how that's translated. And as we play with one of these, it will be directly influencing the rest. And you can use that to help you kind of shift the way things are positionally. Now we could also use something like the normal output. So we saw that true normal here with the Z output, and it looks like everything that's sort of closer in on these cracks is going to be right here. And then everything on the outside closer to us is going to be this color. And again, we just need to play with which one we want to use. We've got normal and true normal. Not seeing a huge difference there, but let's say in this case, only the areas in blue we want to have that most of the dust area on them. And so let's go ahead and start playing with more realistic colors here. And start with a sort of bright value there. And then in this case, make it sort of a darker gray there. And we're actually going to use this to help us drive the mapping here too as well. So let's use this one for the color input here and this one for the mapping of our mix shader node. So now if we look at this, the dust is only going to appear in areas that are on the surface. So down in here in the middle, we're not getting any dust because those are sort of further on the inside. And it's settling more on the top than it is on the sides over here. So let's play a little bit with not making this completely go away. So we'll take this up a little bit more. Okay, and then we could possibly even still have a value that's a little bit lower than that, just for those deepest areas in here in the middle. And now let's look at this again. Okay, so you can see it's already sort of behaving like dust would, and now we need to go ahead and start driving the look a little bit better. So if we just look at how this is appearing on the surface here, we need to ask ourselves if we're happy with the way that's looking. One of the things we might want to do is play a little bit with ways to cake the dust up around certain edges. If it hasn't really been touched a whole lot, that wouldn't occur as much, but we could add some displacement in there for that. We could add a little bit of noise, so we could break this up a little bit so it's not so perfect. Let's do a noise right here. Half an hour left. Let's see what we can do with this. Okay. So I want this to be pretty subtle. So I'll start off with something like that, and then let's say we want to add these together in terms of the color here. So we can mix them half and half, but in this case, I think maybe I want to multiply this a little bit. And just to help kind of clarify the color here, me go ahead and darken these areas up a little bit. So pull this contrast in. So you can see how that's looking. And the more we mix this in over here, the more that's going to behave. Now, it's using multiply, so only the dark areas are actually coming through right here. So you can kind of see that's what's going on. So I want to back that off a little bit so it's a little bit more subtle. And maybe that's still a little too bright. Maybe we want to dull this down. And then we can play with the way it's sort of transparent. So maybe we have a transparent or even translucent. We'll stick with transparent for right now. And let's start with taking our mix from here and adding the transparency in, seeing how that looks. So it looks like what this is going to do is make the entire object transparent instead of just the surface. So let's play a little bit with the translucency instead. Well, first let's hook this up and actually see if that's what's going to happen. I wasn't expecting it to take the entire object away, but since we're previewing, maybe that's why it's happening. And once again, let's plug this in for the mapping and preview again. Okay. Pull that in actually. Yeah, so it's actually going to try to make the entire amber object transparent instead of just this layer. So what we would probably need to do to get around that is create an entirely separate cycles shader and then layer those on top of each other. But in this case, I don't think I want to do that. Let's play instead with maybe some translucency and just see if it gives enough of an effect to give us what we want. So if we look at the translucency here, it's kind of gonna make it seem a little bit like it's see-through, but it's not really gonna give it that much of an effect. And I want to dull this down quite a bit. Maybe something like that. And let's take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so I'm going to mix this in just slightly. Yeah, let's do like a 0.15. And what we could also try to do on top of using this mapping here to drive the positional placement is we could play with adding some noise to randomize that effect on top of that as well. And so if we were to duplicate this down here, let's go ahead and kind of organize this a little better. So everything over here is going to be kind of part of the shader, and then everything over here is going to be part of the mapping itself. If we look at this, we're going to want to increase the complexity a bit, maybe make the mapping itself a little bit more intense. And then everything that's dark here will remove the dust. And so what I'm going to do is plug in a mapping node. And then if we shift this around, we can kind of pick a pattern that we're happy with in terms of how this dust is settling. And then kind of see what that's doing. So I'm going to play with the scale a little bit. And we'll just see what this looks like to get started. We'll plug this map back into our factor input for the dust. So that's going to be the factor between the dust and the translucency. So let's look at this real fast and make sure we're still hooked up correctly. And then, yeah, this needs to be plugged into here so I can see what that looks like. Okay. So we crank up the intensity of the white areas. You can see how that's fading that in and kind of getting that on. We really want to have this contrasted so it's clear where the black and white areas are. So that way it's not sort of transitioning smoothly. And this way it looks like there's patterns of dust that have kind of settled onto the area here. Now, let's jump back to this map real fast and play with some of these parameters until we're kind of happy with the way this is looking. I think I want this to be, I want to try to find a pattern that looks like, starts off in a good place with it looking like it's being handled. And so maybe it's only got some areas on the top where it's not really being touched, but on the sides where someone's picking this up, moving it around, it's got some of that mixed in. So what we can do is we want to keep the black areas black and the white areas white, but in the white areas, we want to mix in this existing blend. And I'm actually going to really increase the way this is already kind of working from top to bottom. And so let's go ahead and grab another color mix node. And we're going to want to find a way to put, so this is our base. We'll plug this one into the factor. Well, that's one way to do it. We could also put this in color 1, this in color 2. And we want to, let's see, we could overlay. The best way to do this is to put this map into the factor here. So that way only the white areas are going to be affected. And then we can possibly mix the areas together. Play with this one. Anyways, we can just cycle through these nodes until we find something that kind of works the way we want it to. So if we're happy with that, we can preview this again. Kind of see what that's looking like. Okay, now let's make sure we're kind of blending this the right way. And are we happy with how intense that is looking? So one of the things I'm not excited about right now is the cracks and how they're kind of standing out completely. Ideally, like maybe the dust kind of filled these in a little bit. So maybe we need to lose those. So if we look in here, maybe we can dial back some of this again. And we'll bring these up. We'll start here, and then we'll get even brighter. Yeah, maybe we just lose that. See what that does. Not bad. Like that a little more. It's kind of losing it in these areas. Now, it's still not going to completely cover that up unless we modeled something or something like that, because you have to remember we're just adding a layer in a shader, right? So if we actually want to have edges, we have to either model something or we have to figure out a way to affect the normals. So if we want to do that, we could do an easy fix on the normal map and kind of get an edge effect at least. So we need to find the part of the map that has the black and white here. And then if we want to go ahead and add that into a bump node that is going to affect the dust so it settles a little higher on that mesh, we can do that. So let's go ahead and grab a vector bump node. This will take a black and white input such as this into the height and then create a normal map from it. So if we were to preview this, you can see what that looks like. Now, this needs to have the same vector input as all of this does down here. So we need to grab this and pull that in. And then you can see the same result here. So I believe that is what we want. I'm not entirely sure which one of these to select, but maybe this will work. So basically anything that is part of this nodes tree for the dust that has a normal input, we need to then plug this into. Okay, yeah, it's not doing what I wanted. Part of that might be because it's turned up very high. But another part of that might just be because we are using the wrong thing. So in this case, what do we need? What do we need? Okay, yeah, maybe that's doing it for us. Let's turn this back up and see how much that gives us. So you can see quite a bit going on here. So it really looks like it's caked on there. If we want those transition points to be even tighter, we can bring this in to where that's an even sharper fall off. Now that's a little bit more unrealistic in my opinion. So maybe we pull this back and do something like this. I prefer subtlety whenever I can over, you know, just slamming things in there. Okay. So even this is probably a little strong, but that definitely feels like dust, at least to me. It's important to remember to put this sort of thing on top of your glossy nodes that are up here, because obviously it's going to block any of that sort of stuff from happening. I don't want the dust to be coming through that much. It's a little much for me. So we can either lower the white down to make it a little bit more transparent, like that. And with ease on, maybe that'll work for us. There we go. It's a little bit more subtle that way. Now, what's great about this is we can save this entire part of this tree and then reuse it on pretty much every object in the scene. So it's going to be a plus. So we grab all of this stuff right here, and then we can group this. And if you want to open and close a group, you can just hit tab and then open up our properties over here. We can label this dust. And then if we wanted to, we could go in here and set up separate parameters to make it so where we wouldn't even have to get into this group and tweak anything later on. So we could create a custom slider for how much dust we want and stuff like that. And then what's great about this is if you hit Shift A and you have a group here, go down to group, and any group that you've saved, you can reuse it. So right here we have node group. So we call this dust. You'll see it show up right here. And now I can pull this into any of my other materials that I want and keep everything organized. So there we go. Okay, so I'll play with that a little bit more. We'll have to see how much we want to add into that. Maybe give it some noise for displacement, stuff like that. And we'll see how that is working. Okay. So we got about 15 minutes left. Anybody have anything else that they have questions about or maybe want to get into tonight? 2 hours always just seems like it goes by so fast. I'm perplexed by this substance output issue, and I'm sure it's something very simple, but I'm not sure what it is. So I'm seeing a lot of things going on here when I tried the Blender export, and yeah, so basically online it's saying I need to go in and just add them in, but I'm not seeing a place to do that for an opacity map, things like that. Maybe it's talking about in the actual export settings in here. So we could drag in an opacity map. But that should already be set up, I would think. So yeah, weird. Anyways, like I said, I'll work on that and figure that out. All right, guys, super excited that you guys joined me on the stream tonight. Few hiccups, but we're kind of getting there. So I'll continue to work on this. Tomorrow, we're going to be jumping in and working on actually grunging things up for the textures themselves. And so we'll probably spend more time either in Substance or Photoshop or both. And we'll talk a little bit about stuff like that. And then on Friday, again, we're going to jump in and play with concept art for a hand-carved pipe that we're going to put in the scene here. And so that's what we'll be doing then. So before I go, if you are new to the stream, then definitely want to share with you kind of why I'm here. So theorangeguild.com is my website. And it's a training platform for Blender, and I'm hoping to turn this into the one-stop sort of place for anybody that wants to kind of level their skills up in Blender. So this is kind of a place for you to come and train. If you go to the training section, you can see all the courses that we have currently. This is the project we're working on right now. So you can see how to build all of these few objects here. And I'm going to come back and do a bigger class on 3D illustration once I get all of these things worked out in this project right here. But definitely check the guild out. If you want to join, you can check the description. There'll be a link in there for the first month free. And then after that, if you go to the membership section, you can see that it's $19 a month, $199 a year. And you get unlimited access to every course, tutorial, anything that we start to come out with. And it's a great deal if you would like to level up your skills and keep up to date with stuff that's coming out. When 2.8 releases, we'll have a course for that. And of course, we're going to keep the live streams going, and then all of that is happening. So you can sign up for a free membership too if you want to sign up for a free account and sign up for the mailing list here, and you'll be able to get free training. So actually, if you go to the guild website and sign up for the newsletter, you'll get your link for your first month free there as well. And thank you guys for checking out the stream. Tomorrow, I'm going to be on at 7 p.m. So it's the same time every week, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 7 p.m. I'll be coming on to the stream. And so, like I said, tomorrow we're going to be working on grunging up the textures here. So I don't know if we'll start working on the map or work on grunging up what's already here in the journal, something like that. And then Friday, we're going to be actually designing concept art for that pipe that I mentioned. But anyways, I'm going to end the stream a little bit early tonight. I want to say thank you guys for joining in, and hope you enjoyed it. And I'll see you guys again tomorrow at 7 p.m. So stay cool.